Hello, welcome to Law Excellence. I am Harsha Mannava and I teach anthropology at Law Excellence. We are doing the book called Sapiens, A Brief History of Humankind. And today we are in the third chapter. It's called A Day in the Life of Adam and Eve. Let's begin and see what ideas we get to learn today. In the previous video, we discussed issues like how humans came out of Africa and how they spread, and in the next video we discussed finer aspects of cognitive revolution, isn't it? We discussed how our capacity for language developed, and language gave us ability to imagine new concepts, new ideas that didn't exist at all. And all of this formed the foundation on which humans established cooperation, and cooperation is the strongest force that made us so successful as a species. Today, we'll take up another important idea. For example, let me start with a few interesting possibilities. Today, we see many hunter-gatherers, right? Most of us have not directly seen them, but we would have seen them on documentaries, in news. We hear about tribes in Andaman. Here, close to Hyderabad, there are Chenchus, and if you go to northeast, you find many other hunter-gatherer tribes. And we frequently hear about this hunter-gatherer tribes in the Amazon basin in Brazil, Yanomamo Indians, and so on. The notion we have is that hunter-gatherers' life is very bad. We assume that their life is of low standard, whereas our life is of higher standard. Or to put it in another way, if we have to look back in history, we think that fine, humans were leading a very miserable existence as hunter-gatherers, and they sought to improve their quality of life. And in pursuit of that goal, they shifted to something called agriculture, isn't it? We assume that as hunter-gatherers, they had a very poor quality of life, and in seeking to improve their quality of life, they shifted from hunting-gathering to agriculture. And we assume that they lived happily ever after. This is a common notion many of us hold. But today, you will be surprised to realize that that is not at all correct. In fact, the life of the past hunter-gatherers was very rich. And the life of the early farmers was not without its share of big problems. And if you had to compare the quality of both these standards of living, in fact, the hunter-gatherers had a much better quality of life than the farmers who came later. So humans were better off as hunter-gatherers, but then they shifted to farming, hoping that their quality of life will improve, only to realize that they had done something that only made their life worse. Isn't it shocking? I remember a few years ago when I first came across these ideas, it was like, wow, I was so wrong. Then the automatic question is, why did we do something that only made our lives bad? We'll try to understand some answers to that question. So, the central focus of today's topic is what was life between 70,000 years ago and 12,000 years ago, that is between cognitive revolution and between the time when people developed farming. What was life really like? Let's try to understand that. First, in trying to reconstruct these events, we have a special problem. The hunter-gatherers did not leave written manuscripts, they did not leave us HD videos to analyze their life. No. We have to reconstruct their life based on some artifacts, some tools they used. And sadly, those people had very minimal belongings, hardly any personal belongings. And much of even these minimal belongings were made from decomposable material like wood. Very few were made of stone, which endured and which can be found even today. But a big chunk of their daily artifacts were made out of material which could decompose like wood. And we also have some bones and other stone tools. So we are trying to primarily rely on them, But these evidences, this ensemble is so limited. So archaeologists and anthropologists try to develop alternate methods to study what could have been the life of hunter-gatherers in the past, not today, in the past. Then they realized, fine, to understand the life of the past hunter-gatherers, why can't we study the life of present-day hunter-gatherers and see if we can reconstruct those events? I hope you're following me. So we want to study the life of the past hunter-gatherers. In pursuit of that, we thought, what if we study the life of the present-day hunter-gatherers or foragers? To understand the past foragers, why can't we study the present-day foragers and try to reconstruct the lifestyle? There will be some differences, yes, but it's possible that the basic could be the same. This is the idea. So we started looking at modern foraging societies to understand how people lived in the past. But when we try to do this, there are some unique problems. This idea seems brilliant at the outset, but it is not without its share of pitfalls, my friends. So what are the issues in dealing with this, in using this approach? We have to be careful because, first of all, modern day hunter-gatherers are not pristine hunter-gatherers. They're not like living in zoo, right? They're influenced by the industrial society around them. So though they are hunter-gatherers, there is some cultural exchange with the societies that are living around them. For example, in the past, hunter-gatherers used to use spears and they might have used some wooden tools. Today they use metal tools. Some of them even use guns, isn't it? So there is some contact and they are influenced by the world around them. They are not living in a cage. Second, many hunter-gatherer societies of today are living in margins. For example, where do you find hunter-gatherers today? Do you find them here in Hyderabad? Would you find them in Krishna Godavari Delta or Gangetic Delta? Obviously not. You find them in marginal areas like deserts, mountainous areas, tropical dense forest areas. So hunter-gatherers are, that way of life is only surviving in marginal environments. It's no longer surviving in other parts of the world. So, but in the past, 20-30,000 years ago, even in Hyderabad, Delhi, all this area, the Gangetic Delta, the Gangetic Plains, all of them would have had some small groups of hunter-gatherers. But today, hunter-gatherers are living in few areas and these are also very marginal environments. And third, hunter-gatherer is not one uniform group. Within this larger mode of economy, there are huge variations. So who do we pick today and who do we reconstruct from them in the past? If you take Chenchus today, first of all, do Chenchus, are they indicative of all the hunter-gatherers? Not really. Chenchus live differently, Andamanis live differently, Sentinelese live differently, Nagas live differently. Now if you take Chenchus and reconstruct, the picture we are going to get is of whom? Is of Chenchus ancestors, or is it applicable to the larger Indian subcontinent, or can we make something about the whole world? That's another dilemma. So these are the issues in trying to understand what could have been the possible way of life of the hunter-gatherers in the past. With that large disclaimer, let us try to understand what was their life. Harari calls hunter-gatherers the original affluent society. Wow, there could not have been a better way to convey this idea. He is calling them the original affluent society, the originally well-off people. Why does he say that? There are three important reasons why he says that. He thinks their diet was much better. Their diet was wholesome and varied, that they had better diet than us. And they did not, spend their lives working off like us. They did not burn themselves. Today, we hear people talking about, yes, I had 60 hours a week, I'm workaholic, I love working. We hear all this, right? But hunter-gatherers had relatively short working weeks. They enjoyed their leisure. They did not, spend their life slogging away. So there was very little work and they enjoyed their free time. And more importantly, I think a more important point that is relevant to the present day, we are living in the age of coronavirus. So hunter-gatherers, during their time, infectious diseases were very rare. So on these counts, he thinks they lived a very rich life. Let us explore this in more detail. So we'll try to understand the life of hunter-gatherers in three important ways: in the economic angle, the religious angle, and in the political sphere. We'll try to understand in these three dimensions. We'll begin with the economic dimension and see what was their life like. First of all, hunter-gatherers, the population was very small. Humans today are what? 7 billion and still exploding. But hunter-gatherers of the past were very few in number. In fact, the entire population of humans at that time would not have been more than the size of today's Cairo. They were very few in number, and even those few lived in small bands. The population density was very small. They didn't live in large villages or anything. So they lived in small bands, and the small bands consisted of something like 10 to 20 individuals. That's it. So first of all, their population was less. Second, they lived in small groups, and these groups were nomadic. They were not settled in one place. They were constantly moving. They lived on the road. So there was no one place where they put their tents and lived for their entire lifetimes. They were constantly on the move in search for food. And because of this lifestyle, they had a lot of intimacy. The members knew each other very intimately, and they formed very good friendships. Of course, the consequence of that is that there was no loneliness, but there was no privacy as well. So that's the overall view of how hunter-gatherers lived. But of course, the nomadism is generally true, but once in a while, occasionally, we also saw that they set up permanent fishing villages. So whenever they found some river or a pond, lake that was full of fish, they used to settle near the water body, and they used to set up fishing villages, and of course after they exhausted the resource, they would move. So this is the picture. And hunter-gatherers were the first to domesticate dog. So domestication of dog began with hunter-gatherers. It did not come with agriculture, because the earliest evidence of dog domestication is at least 15,000 years. At 15,000 years ago, we have conclusive evidence, but it could have been much older. So dog was domesticated for the first time by hunter-gatherers. It is the first animal we domesticated. We see today many of us have pets which are dogs of various breeds, isn't it? So this bonding between dog and man is about 15,000 years old, and this at least 15,000 years old, and this long period of 15,000 years gave us the time span to understand each other. That's the reason dogs are very well used to humans, and humans also understand dogs well. That is because we have a huge common history of 15,000 years that allowed us to understand each other. But why were dogs domesticated? Dogs were originally domesticated to help in hunting and fighting. It was used as an alarm system against wild beasts, and sometimes these bands faced raids and some thefts from neighbors. So dogs used to serve as warnings against human intruders. This is how people domesticated dogs, and they grew so fond of these animals that when we started finding evidence, we realized that in some places people were buried with their dogs, with their pets. So here, this is a fossil we recovered from northern Israel. In this region here, this is a man buried with his dog. Of course, it's not in Israel. Even in India, we have a prehistoric site called Burzom in Kashmir. Even there we found that in Burzom, Gufkral, these are both Paleolithic sites in Kashmir Valley. Even there we realized that people were buried along with their pets. That shows the importance of dog or these pets in the life of these hunter-gatherers. It could have been importance, or it could have also been their affectionate relationship. And though we call them hunter-gatherers, their most important activity was gathering. Hunting was still not very developed because hunting required larger and more powerful tools which only came later. And hunting also requires more complex social organization. You need to lay traps, you need to track an animal, you need to coordinate with each other and attack the animal, something like an elephant for example. So hunting was a little more complicated task. But largely they relied on what we call as gathering. Gathering was the sapiens' main economic activity, and women played a large and predominant role in gathering activity. As a result, if you are a gatherer, that also means something else, isn't it? You can't gather whatever you want. So, because you are a gatherer, these hunter-gatherers, these foragers had vast knowledge of their immediate surroundings. They needed to know where they find which plants are found in which season, where do they find fresh water bodies, which time of the year is the water clean, and which food is edible, which is not. So all of this was not easy to come by. So hunter-gatherers had extraordinary knowledge about their surroundings. Unlike us, we probably don't even have sound knowledge of our own homes, isn't it? But hunter-gatherers had enormous amount of knowledge about their surroundings. So in another way we can say that as an individual, a hunter-gatherer was more knowledgeable than a man is today. But as a collective, as a society, of course, we have vaster knowledge. We know so much, isn't it? We know about space, we know about atom, we know about genes, genetics, DNA, we know so much. But at an individual level, each individual today only takes up a specialization and knows a lot about one particular narrow specialization. But hunter-gatherers were horizontal. They knew a lot about their surroundings. And since gathering activity was physically demanding, hunter-gatherers had bodies which were very fit as marathon runners. Perhaps even years of yoga and tai chi will not make us as fit as hunter-gatherers. So they had a very fit body because of their lifestyle. And also more importantly, today hunter-gatherers enjoyed lot of leisure and their work was very less. We have something like 60 to 80 hour week, most of us. Workaholics work for 60-80 hours and a typical person works for 40 to 50 hours. But hunter-gatherers, they worked only for 30 to 40 hours, 35 hours a week, that's it, because they only had to go and collect food. And this gave them a lot of time to play, gossip, paint, pursue hobbies, just hang out with their friends and relax and take life easy. So they enjoyed life, they enjoyed their leisure. And their work was also much more fulfilling because their work was not repetitive. A man wakes up in the morning, then he decides which area they want to go. He meets his buddies, they all discuss, fine, yesterday we went in this direction, today let's go in the other direction. They all then plan up and slowly move, and every day is little fresh. It's not mechanical, sitting before a computer and operating and feeling, nonchalant. But this lifestyle gave them non-routinized lives, which made each day interesting, and each day probably had its own store of adventure. And also, their diet was nutritious and more fulfilling. Why do I say that? Today most of us depend on, our diets are extremely limited. We eat rice, we eat a lot of wheat probably, and few vegetables. But hunter-gatherers, their diet was very vast. They ate berries, mushrooms, meat, fruits, etc. so much. Today our diet is predominantly roti, which is wheat, or rice, that's it. A few grains have become the staple of our food palette. But hunter-gatherers, their diet was very wide. What is the benefit of this? This makes them, they are not at the mercy of any single crop. So even if one crop fails, they have other food sources. So they were less likely to suffer from starvation and malnutrition, because a vast range of diet exposed them to a more nutritious food source. And hunter-gatherers are also, since their life was so flexible, they could easily build it when a natural disaster hits, a cyclone, a flood, or a heat wave. Anything that comes and destroys their life, they could easily rebuild it quickly, not a big task. Then the other important aspect is that infectious diseases were very rare. In particular, a hunter-gatherer probably has a risk of being eaten by a tiger, but his risk of dying from coronavirus or malaria or smallpox, this was less. Why do we say that? Because infectious diseases originated when we started agriculture and we began domestication of animals. So all these pathogens, parasites were hosts, these animals were hosts of these parasites and pathogens, and when we domesticated them, we started coming in closer contact with these pathogens. That's how infectious diseases developed. So infectious diseases are an outcome of domestication of animals and a settled life, which brought us in closer contact to animals which were reservoirs or hosts of a vast range of pathogens. Since these people lived in small bands and they kept roaming, even if one band was affected by a disease, the fact that some other band was very far away and rarely came in touch with this band made sure that it didn't pass from one person to other very easily. So this table, we can pause and look at this table. It's a very beautiful table. This here is a life of foragers and this here is a life of agriculturalists. It's a little more detailed than what I discussed. This is from anthropology. So those who have more interest can look at this table and compare the range of features that food collectors or foragers have and agriculturalists have. This is an example of a present day hunter-gatherer, a woman of this tribe called Yanomamo. And this is another image of a man trying to hunt a large elephant. This is a hunter-gatherer house made largely from elephant tusks and other bones. They would have used some animal skin to cover up this bone structure. Next, what do we discussed their economic life. Next we move to their religious life. What could have been their religious life? Of course, they didn't have gods. They didn't have Bible or Quran or the Bhagavad Gita. Nor did they have priests or temples or churches or masjids. But they still had some religious beliefs, some beliefs about life after death, how do people die and so on. But we don't exactly know what belief system they had, because it's very difficult to understand belief system from stone tools and bones of the past. But we can say animism, most of them had some kind of animistic belief system. Now animism is not like Hinduism, it is not one religion, it's a type of religion. Animism means belief that all objects have some kind of soul, spirit, a plant, an animal, or people who have died have souls and their souls take interest in the lives of people who are alive. So animism or belief in souls would have been the earliest religion. We can assume that hunter-gatherers had some kind of animistic beliefs. Each band or each tribe might have had its own variation of animism. So animism is a general term we are giving to their belief system. But each tribe, each local tribe would have had a different variant of animism. And what else do we know? We also know that though they are by and large egalitarian and society was equal, there was no superior, inferior, rich, poor, we find that some hunting groups may have been hierarchical, like a chimpanzee. A chimpanzee group has an alpha male, the boss, who monopolizes all the females, but other males of the group have to live grudgingly against this one alpha male who is trying to monopolize all the female chimpanzees. Ours was not like that, but there must have been some slight hierarchy. How do we know that? Our theory comes from burial sites of the past. When we dug up some burial sites, for example, 2 sites from Russia, Sungir in Russia, give us some picture. There was one dead man, he was covered with lot of ornaments, shells, animal shells, ivory beads and so on. Lot of ornaments where his body was covered in lot of ornaments, and there were many other important valuables that were buried along with him. Now other graves next to him in the vicinity did not have this ornamentation. What could this tell us? Something like this man who died must have been an important person, a chief, a priest, or some hunter who was the very valued hunter in the group, which means that this man enjoyed higher status than other people in the group. Second, we also found 2 children, graves of 2 children, and their graves were covered with similar decorative features like ivory beads. Now, what can we conclude if children's graves have lot of rich ornaments? Clearly, the children would not have had the enough lifetime to work and procure all of them or earn those valuables. Probably these children must be the children of the elite members. Their parents must have been well off and their wealth was transmitted to these children. So, what can we say about their beliefs? One, yes, they had animistic beliefs. They certainly believed in life after death, which is why some burial sites have grave goods. Second, there was some sort of hierarchy. They were probably not like today, very rich and very poor, but within the smaller group, one or two people must have been given higher status compared to others who were like commoners. So these paintings that we are going to see now give us some picture of their supernatural world, some idea of their belief system. For example, this is a painting from a cave in France. You see wild animals. Mostly these paintings show us hunting scenes. And this is a very beautiful painting from Argentina that many hand impressions were made, and when you look at it for the first time, it seems as if this is a glass layer and somebody with many people are trying to reach out to you from the other side of the glass, and it looks as if you see their fingerprints, isn't it? Very terrific. And once again, paintings of wild horses from one cave in France. Next, the political system. First, these groups lived in small bands, small group, right? So there was no scope for a big king ruling from a capital, controlling a vast territory, nothing like that. All of them were equal. They took decisions by discussion, groups would discuss. One elder member who has more experience might give an advice. Others are free to take it or free to reject it also. So there was no leadership structure, there was no authority system. Their life, was largely independent. So even if in some groups, even if one person is trying to boss himself or if he is trying to be domineering, others will just, avoid him. They will just try not to talk to him. So, bossing is very rare. Authority structure is also rare. Then, did they have warfare? This is a very controversial topic. We are not sure, because how do you know whether they had warfare or not? We find some skeletons which had some injuries, but these injuries could be either from some fall, some damage. They need not be from war, isn't it? But so about this, we basically don't know whether these people had war or not. What we can say is some groups maybe had war, of course, and maybe some other hunter-gathering groups were not so warmongering. They must have lived in peace. How do we know that? So we looked at two sites. One, the burial sites we got from Israel and Portugal the fossils in those areas did not show any wounds. They were very healthy bodies which were buried. So those indicates maybe these groups were peaceful from Israel, Portugal. But from another site called Jabal Sahaba, there we found some kind of mass grave. Skeletons, badly wounded. One skeleton had some kind of stone tool pierced into its bones. Maybe that is an indicator of some violence that existed or some violent attacks were existing in these people. So, and maybe there was also a massacre. So what we can say conclusively is that we are not sure whether there was warfare or not. We can only conclude some may have had warfare, whereas some didn't have warfare. This picture, for example, here, of course, when hunter-gatherers have warfare, it is not like they use military tanks, nuclear bombs, aircraft carriers and fighter jets. But their warfare is very crude. This picture here is an example of some kind of war between two hunting groups in Kenya. So this is how a warfare of a hunter-gatherers looks. They don't have generals, commanders and ranks which are organized into infantry, cavalry and so on. Very non-organized and just mad war. Next, of course, all this is not to say that hunter-gatherers' life was beautiful without its share of problems. It definitely had its problems. A hunter-gatherer, foraging person may not have died of AIDS or malaria, but they would certainly have the risk of falling from a tree or being eaten up by a lion or a tiger. And so as a result, in general, life expectancy was shorter of these people and child mortality was very high. In these societies, there was high child mortality. So they used to have, a woman used to conceive so many children, hoping that at least they gave 10 births, at least 3 or 4 would survive. That was the kind of life they had. And many of them also were not so kind. Some would abandon or kill their old and disabled people because the group had to move, and an old or disabled person is a liability on the group. And there was a lot of mockery and could have been teasing of misfits and deviants. And many also practiced violent practices like human and child sacrifices. So a hunting gathering life was not a perfect society. We can only say that humans were better off in general. The quality of life was better in some aspects, but this society also had its own share of issues. Now, of course, we discussed so much about people who lived in the past, but why are we interested in them? We are interested in them in the hope that maybe some of our present behaviors, which do not make any sense when we look at them objectively, the hope is that maybe if we try to look at those habits or those behaviors in the light of our evolutionary past, in the light of our hunting gathering evolutionary past, maybe then some of our behaviors will make sense. For example, we'll pick 2 of them today. 1, why do we eat high calorie food? And second, on family. Why do people cheat? Why do they have affairs? Affairs are very hurting. Why do we still have them? Many have them. So we'll explore these 2 ideas. First, today obesity is like a pandemic. We moved from starvation to obesity. It is a pandemic across the world, more so in the developed world. The developing world is not very far behind in this area. So why do people gorge on this high calorie junk food? Why are they driven towards it? Here we have a theory called the gorging gene theory. This theory says that hunters, when they were trying to find food, it was very rare for them to find a a berry which was very sweet, maybe once in a month. So as a result, whenever they found something that was sweet and with rich in calories, they would just catch and eat all of it, eat as much as they can. So this behavior of gorging comes as an outcome of scarcity of tasty foods. So this eating in large volumes may be a result of our evolutionary past, where we used to gorge on high calorie food whenever we found it. That could be a reason. Next, we move to our family system. Today we see large, widespread adultery, infidelities. Many people are suffering silently from this. Either both spouses or one of the spouses at some point has an affair, and the other partner finds it out, and it's deeply offensive. So why do we have this marriage problem? Why are people struggling in marriages because of affairs? There are 2 issues here. Some scholars say that they raise the debate, are humans monogamous or polygamous? One set of people think, no, we are designed to be monogamous. Monogamy is the best way of life, and it's not just the best way of life, or even biologically we are designed for monogamy. This is how some people think. Whereas the interesting theory is something else. It's called ancient commune theory. This theory suggests that as hunter-gatherers, people lived in groups with no strict one man, one woman relationship. There were casual sex among the males and females of the group. There was no one man, one woman loyalty. It was a loose kind of bonding between men and women. Because of this, and we lived like this for a long period, perhaps 1 lakh years. And now, in the last few years, 2000 years, is when nuclear family and a monogamous family started coming up. And they say that we feel evolutionarily we are tuned for polygamy, whereas socially we are compelled to follow monogamy. This leads to conflict. Our inner wiring is towards polygamy, whereas society and social living is towards monogamy. And this conflict is what gives rise to people, having affairs. This is what gives rise to adultery and infidelity. Interesting theory, isn't it? Perhaps more research into how hunter-gatherers lived and, looking at our behaviors from an evolutionary lens, This is called evolutionary psychology. This field is called evolutionary psychology. This probably can unravel some interesting aspects about why we do certain things that do not make any sense in the present day. The answer could lie in the long hunting-gathering past that all of us inherited. I hope this was very interesting. We'll come back again with the next chapter. Thank you.